But hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our last emergency response program webinar. Super excited to have you on here. Interested to see how many people end up joining today who have also been with us through the entire program. So thank you if you are here and you've been attending all throughout. So today we're talking about remote work. Obviously, this has been all of our lives, or many of our lives at least, for the last several weeks. So we're going to be talking about, once the workforce is remote and once we're able to actually go back into work, how do we get people to come back? How do we keep people engaged as they are working remotely? And then how do we make that transition back? So to speak with us today about that, we are super thrilled to have Jill Chapman, who is a senior performance consultant with Insperity, which is the HR and payroll and employment organization that Generator actually uses to run our business. So if you're interested in learning more about them, we'll be including some information in a follow-up email. But in the meantime, just super thrilled to have Jill joining us today and sharing her expertise with us. One announcement that I wanted to make really quickly before we dove in, for those of you who have applied for EIDL or PPP, we are receiving word that folks are finding those amounts deposited into their bank accounts. So please check on that if you did apply. Hopefully you might have a Christmas morning moment today or tomorrow or sometime soon. But if you did not apply for those, we definitely recommend still applying for the PPP. So just an FYI, it sounds like both pools of money are tapped right now. We're not sure about whether the EIDL is going to reopen. The PPP, there is a chance that they replenish that pool. And if they do, we cannot stress enough how important it is to talk to your bank immediately and get in line for those funds. Okay, as always, if you have any questions during today's webinar, please type those questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom window. We really want today's discussion to be very lively and back and forth. Jill has some great content for us, but we would love to hear what questions you have. And then tech issues. Unfortunately, we can't help with them. We can barely help ourselves. But if you do have any technical issues today, feel free to reach out to Zoom directly. Okay, so with that, I will stop sharing my screen. I will let Jill share hers again, and we will kick things off here.
All right, guys, thank you so much for being with us today. Hopefully, we've all kind of settled into a place where if we weren't working remote before the pandemic, most of us are, if we're still able to keep our staffs at all working remote. And I think that that's maybe our launch pad for a conversation about, what are we going to do in the future? Because I think we still need to talk a little bit about the current state. We're smack dab in the middle of it now. Some of us have been working, as I mentioned, some of you on the call have never worked inside an office per se and have been remote the entire time. But a huge number of us were thrust into this work from home when we really weren't organized that way. And so we want to make sure that we start from that level playing ground, and then we'll talk a little bit about how that's going to change our future state. What we're dealing with right now. I think now we've kind of gotten used to this idea that we're working from home, right? And now that we've settled in, it's an opportunity for us to look at where this has exposed us as organizations, if you will. Our management style, our leadership styles, our employees' productivity, moving to a results-only type workforce in which we can't see what they're doing all the time, but we can certainly see if somebody's productive, has created issues both on the leadership side of the spectrum as well as on the employee side. So some of the things that we need to be ever mindful of is that communication is really where we need to be right now. Not micromanaging, because that's something that we've pointed out. And I think that kind of speaks to that whole trust issue, I can't see them, so are they actually working for me? Well, look at what they produce for you. That's going to tell you about that sort of thing. So being communicative and very open. Not too much, but please don't be missing in action for your employees as well. That's been something else that we've seen. Maybe we didn't communicate a lot when we were all working in the office, but we knew each other was there. And that gave maybe a sense of satisfaction or ease to an employee. But now that they can't see them, see their managers, see their leaders, that's a problem. And because some of us kind of threw this together at the last minute, I think that there's an issue of structure that we have to think about. And if we haven't built structure into our days for our employees, now is the time, right? Because without structure, our efficiency is certainly going to suffer. Some best practices that I've seen is kind of taking a look at that agile work framework, if you will, having stand-up meetings in the morning, stand-up meetings at night, just trying to make sure that we're all on the same page and we're all operating within the same structure so we can be as efficient as possible. And never more important than right now is that idea behind compassion and motivation. You know, before this whole remote working thing, this whole work from home thing got started, there was a survey that was done, and I think something like 95% of all knowledge workers is a Zapier study, and they said, I definitely could work from home, I should work from home, I want to work from home. But now that we're working from home, I think that there's some issues. Some people have found that it wasn't as easy as they thought it was going to be. It wasn't as fulfilling as they thought it was going to be. And so I think being able to help our folks work through the motivation from a work from home standpoint, but also having compassion for where they sit. You know, they may very well have small children at their feet, dogs, cats, whatever. And they could have kids that are trying to use the Zoom at the same time they are. They could have a partner, a spouse working from home. So having a little compassion for when and how that work gets done could be very, very important. So, but you know, that's where we're at. That's our reality today, right now, where we're sitting. And I think it then says, okay, so what's next? If this is where we're sitting and these are the issues that we're faced with today, what's going to happen to us in the future? What are we going to think about when governors and you know, national governments start kind of letting the foot off the gas a little bit and having us be able to, we'll never return to the way it was before, I guarantee you that, but being able to return to something that looks different than what it looks like today. But what's that's going to look like? So I think we want to talk about a flexible future. This whole idea of work-life balance and how that's going to impact our employees. I think we can't talk about the future without spending a little time talking about travel and real estate practices as they exist. And because I'm an HR girl, you're going to have to bear with me. We're going to talk a little bit about some HR practices. I think it's wise to spend time on how this is going to change the employee expectations as part of that agreement with employer and employee. And then we'll spend just a couple of minutes talking about sustainability and how the impact on our communities from this new way of working that we've all been exposed to, right? That we're all working in. So I think that when we talk about this, and I think this whole the fact that it hinges so much on this remote working, and I think, you know, especially some of you guys who have done this for a long time, you may want to roll your eyes and go, oh my gosh, you know, why are we still talking about remote working? We've been talking about remote working ever since the internet was invented, right? But I think that the pandemic is really highlighting, again, some of the issues that we've had. And just not too long ago, Fast Company did a survey of our employees now that we've instituted these work from home opportunities, if you will. And they're responding to these surveys saying, hey, I feel very connected to my coworkers, even in this time. We're doing happy hours, we're doing coffee breaks, we're having fun, we're connecting, and I'm staying in constant communication with them. I have no problems with that. Like 90% said that was the result, but less than 15% feel connected to headquarters or the main office and their managers, and 3%, just 3% said that they felt connected at all to the C-suite. And that disconnectedness affects our bottom line. Right now, we don't even know where our bottom line is because of all the chaos and the confusion that's been brought by COVID-19. But I certainly think that as we move out of this into the next phase, whatever that looks like, that disconnectedness has to be remedied because it will continue to affect our bottom line. This is the time for innovation, right? And if we have people saying that they're disconnected, that they're not sharing their ideas with their leaders, if they feel voiceless in this whole thing, that's going to be an issue, right? We can't afford right now to stifle the ideas and stifle innovation. Um, and 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 so we need to recognize that our companies are at risk now, and they're going to be at risk in the future. So making sure that we're investing in those sorts of things that allow that innovation to bubble up. Because if we were never innovative, now is the time, right? This is the time. This is the day to take care of that. So I just want to keep us mindful of that because I think that's going to be important not only today, but moving forward in the future, that we stay connected to our teams and they feel the value that they are bringing to our organizations. But now for something completely different. Let's start talking about the future of the work and how it's changing due to coronavirus, right? I think that it goes without saying that we've all figured out that most of us can work remote. Again, I think we were marching here for a long time, but we just weren't motivated to allow all of our people, or we still had our blinders on and some people thought, no, you just can't do this job remotely. Well, we've learned that we can. Not everybody's going to want to. I think we've got some extroverts out there that are dying to get back to the office. I think we have some introverts that are like, hey, this is cool. I love this. But I think what that will open up the door for a more flexible future. Those of us who had, you must be in the office to start the day, you must be in the office at the end of the day, you must be in the office all day, are going to change our approach. And perhaps not allow 100% remote workforce, but allowing some flexibility that, to accommodate different work styles. And again, we don't know how long this is going to play out. I do know that those of us that have kids have a situation in which the schools are starting to make some decisions now, or will make them shortly, about how this is going to affect the fall semester, if you will. So can we really bring everybody back if they can't, if the kids aren't going back to school? What are we supposed to do? Daycares, if kids aren't going to school, daycares might not open. People may not want their kids going to daycare. So this is going to create an opportunity in the in-between as we move on. But that flexible future, I think, is probably here to stay regardless. And so that leads me to talk a little bit about work-life balance, right? Because in this working from home, we found a couple of things. Some people love it because it is allowing them some extra time back in their day because they're not spending time on the road commuting and that sort of thing. And they have been able to juggle their kids and their spouses and partners and people all working at home. What we've also seen, though, is that difficulty of being able to turn it off, right? That you find yourself working on
All right, so it seems like we've got some bandwidth issues. Sorry, everyone. Give us 1 minute. We might need to stop sharing Jill's screen. Okay, so we'll need to wait for Jill to log back on. It sounds like she just got booted. Oh, there she goes.
Okay, we're back. What is the one thing that you don't want to have happen when you're giving a talk? Anyway, so we'll get right back in. So we were talking about some of the lasting changes and some of the things that are going to impact us. We talked about the work-life balance and the flexible future. And if we are more flexible and whether the people are going with our commercial real estate costs. I think those costs are going to fall. I think that the need for corporate complexes is going to diminish somewhat. We've been moving towards this idea of an adaptable kind of commercial real estate program anyway, but I think this is just, like it's done with a lot of things, I think it just accelerated those trends. But again, time for innovation, right? Let's think about how we're using our commercial real estate now, and are there other options for that? Is there a better way to do that? Is there a different way even to build out the spaces that we do have? For the last, I don't know, some of you who are more involved in this part of the world than I am, for a long time we've been moving towards this idea of the open concept, right, at work and at home. But what are we going to think now when we have all this open workspace and the guy right across from me on this little pad that I landed at to do some work? What if he starts coughing, right? So are we going to move back to having some more private spaces in our offices? And that sort of thing. So, all of this is we're just scratching the surface today, but I want to plant these things in your mind as you think about what your life and your organization's life is going to look like later on, to think about that corporate real estate footprint and how could we do that differently, better, more innovatively, and also on the whole travel thing. I think we're learning that we can survive without as many face-to-face meetings. So I do think for those of us who ask for travel budgets, who have to ask for opportunities to go visit people and things and places, that's probably going to be scrutinized a little bit more when we get back to it. That those expenses are going to be questioned a little bit more. And besides the fact, when we all wanted to invest in video conferencing and that sort of thing back in the day, didn't we say, hey, if we can do this, it's going to, cut down on our travel budgets? Well, yeah, okay, so future's here, and that sort of thing is happening to us. And think about all the events that have been canceled, the business events, the conferences, and those sorts of things. So I think the ROI of those things will be questioned too in the future. It doesn't mean that they stop, because we need to stay connected in our industries, in our associations, with like-minded people. But will it look a little bit different how we deploy those things? Will we move to more virtual environments? Will we move to smaller conferences and more localized ideas? And so again, great opportunity to innovate, to think, and to plan for what this could look like post-pandemic. And again, because I'm an HR girl, got to talk about those HR practices. HR practices are bound to change, right? In a very, very basic way, I think if we have fewer humans together in small spaces, it's going to mean fewer HR issues, right? Fewer investigations. And so HR departments are going to be able to allocate their time a little bit better. And I think very importantly, I think the pandemic has moved the Davos Manifesto into just like a statement on a piece of paper to let's put our money where our mouth is, because that Davos Manifesto, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the meeting that happens amongst large employers in Switzerland. February, I think is when it is. But anyway, the Davos conference, the people who were there all signed into the statement that said a corporation's stakeholders, their workers, their community, their partners are every bit as valuable as their investor shareholders. And I think that that's been one thing that's come out of this, right? That we're seeing people actually put their money where their mouth is. Forbes did an article. It was just full of people who have innovated during this time, that were coming out with these bold initiatives driven by HR, mind you, that prioritize both their customers and their employees in these times. And so I think that those kind of examples reveal that we understand as companies, we have a purpose beyond the bottom line. Some of you may have read books on that triple bottom line and corporate social responsibility. But I think that this is just really creating an imperative that we begin to focus on inspiring human potential rather than just being concerned about our productivity, right? It's a shift from focusing on what you do to why you do it. And HR is definitely firmly rooted in the practices, the policies, and the changes that need to take place in this innovative arena. As we move forward, I think this has been a great opportunity to put culture on clear view for the good and maybe not so good. We've all heard horror stories of how some companies have use Zoom to lay off their employees and that sort of thing. But it also, I think, has shown us how we have one industry hiring the laid off workers in an adjacent industry and putting them to work quickly and being able to respond very nimbly and in very inventive ways to what this has done to our organizations. And I think that that's fantastic, right? And then lastly, I think the employee expectations. I think that this is, now that folks have had a taste of this, I think their expectation for having that flexibility from their employer is going to be expected. It's just going to become a hygiene factor in how they pick their next employer. That flexible workforce, the work-life balance, the culture of the organization, how they handled a crisis is going to be very, very important to them. One output that I think we need to think about is, very quickly we started to say, you're essential, you're not essential. And we learned that some people who we thought were so essential, making the big bucks and all that sort of thing, really get shoved to the back. And, we're concerned about the truck driver trying to get our food delivered to us and those sorts of things. And people who had been, kind of lower on the pay totem pole, let's just put it that way, have proven their essentialness to our communities and for us to be able to enjoy life in some semblance of how we did before. So I think that employees are going to begin to evaluate, how did companies see this kind of a role in a pandemic? How will they view it again in the next pandemic or the next natural disaster? And do I want to live through that again? And so you may see some people start to make some decisions about their careers and their job prospects change because they saw how their current situation was treated in this pandemic. So watch for that sort of thing, the employee expectations. We all know that the unemployment rolls are growing by millions on a daily basis, but that's not going to last for long. When we kind of start to rebound out of this, when we start to change the way that we're reacting in this COVID-19 world and starting to look beyond it, we'll be back in that place where we don't have enough people in the right jobs at the right time. So that war for talent will persist beyond this pandemic, I am sure. I don't have a crystal ball, but I can guarantee you that one. And so to be mindful of our brand and how it matches with employee expectations in the future is going to be very, very important. And lastly, we'll just talk for a second on sustainability. I'm coming to you from beautiful Maui. Beautiful Maui that's been on lockdown now for, 7 years. It feels like forever. But probably 4 weeks. We were one of the first to jump on this and shut things down in very, very bold moves. But what's been really interesting to read about is how the fish have come back. And, because there's less tourists, less fishermen out there. So we have more fish. Our water is cleaner. The air is easier to breathe. So I think that some of the sustainability issues that we've learned by taking people out of the air, taking people out of their cars on the road, is something that we need to consider moving forward. Can we continue to do work the way we've done work and have an impact on our communities, have an impact on the sustainability of our environments because of these shifts that we've made? So I think that yet is another area that we need to think about and be positioning our organizations as we move forward to think about how can we continue this environmental change. I mean, we've all seen pictures of Venice where you can actually see, the waters in the canals are clearer, and China's air quality is better, and all these sorts of things. So I think that also is an area that we need to look at and innovate to position our companies to be able to deal with that. So, some of the things that you need to think about from an organizational standpoint as you begin to navigate from here's where we are now to what the future is going to look like is making sure that you have the systems and tools in place for your people right now, and that those are systems and tools that can make it in the next gen, right? I think some of us kind of slap some stuff together. So, really making sure that our investment in those resources will talk to each other and can sustain us for the future. I think it's going to beg looking at policies and procedures from telecommuting, remote access, privacy issues, those sorts of things. Sick time. How are we going to look at that in the future? Are we going to mandate if somebody, are we going to take their temperature every time? Or are we going to mandate if they start coughing, they got to go home? Things like that. And then I think also just an ROI and attention to the ROI of some of those things that we were able to offload before we bring them back, looking at the ROI of those expenditures and how they really relate to the bigger picture of our organization. So I've been talking very, very quickly. I don't know, because of some of the technical difficulties, if we still have some time for some questions, but I would love this to be interactive, and I would love to hear what you guys have to say about the topic.
Yes, thank you so much, Jill. So we do have plenty of time for questions.
Yeah.
So if you are on and you've been listening, please, please, please send in some questions via that Q&A box.
Mm-hmm.
One question that I have to start, so obviously, especially in an office setting where a lot of work is done over the computer anyway,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like that could be a good setting to have some of these options around, does everyone come back to work in person, or do we, some of the tips and recommendations that you have, having more flexibility long term. What about for businesses that don't necessarily have that luxury? So say a restaurant.
Right. So I think that there's a couple of things that this is going to beg. Whenever they take the foot off the gas and they say, yeah, we can start coming back together, I think the employees from a personal standpoint are going to look at this and go, yeah, I still think it's too early. I don't like this idea. I'm not down with this. I don't want to come back. So from a policy standpoint, as an employer, what are we going to do if they say they don't feel safe, right? And how we deal with some of that, I think, is going to be culture driven by our organizations, or how will they come back? How do we set up the office again? If it's a manufacturing environment and we used to have people shoulder to shoulder, are we going to change that a little bit? Are we going to move stations? Or are we going to look at the work a little bit differently? Then that begs a question about ergonomics, right? Because if we start changing the way that we've built our processes, does that impact unfairly on some people from an ADA standpoint and all this? So I'm telling you, HR is going to change, because we're going to have to look at some of these things quickly and be able to be nimble in our responses. But what are we going to do if there are jobs that haven't been going on right now? We've had to just forego them, but then we want to bring them back. What are we going to do about those people who don't want to come back yet? Are we going to fire them? Or are we going to say, that's okay, we understand? Or is there some sort of a hybrid? And I think if you were the employee that didn't feel comfortable coming back, I would want, as a leader, I would want you to come to me with that concern, but I would also want you to come to me with maybe some suggestions. I think that that's very proactive on the employee's part to think about, well, how could it be done a little bit differently? And that person who's in that job knows, right? Like, they know what they do every day. They know how they do it. And if there's any wiggle room to change the way that they do things, listen to them, because they may have an innovative way to be able to address this shift to coming back if they're not quite ready. Did I answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so just scrolling through some of the questions that we're receiving here, do you foresee the creation of entirely new types of businesses or positions as a result of this?
Absolutely. And I also see the demise of some, right? That we are learning, hey, maybe we didn't need that. Remember at the outset, we were talking about how this is kind of shining a light on our organizations, particularly on our management styles and our managers' abilities, but it's also shining a light on productivity, because when we work from home, we move to a results-only workforce, right? It's not about how long you're doing it, how much you're doing it, but what is the deliverable that you're bringing to the table. So I think there's going to be a rebalance of workloads probably, because we're finding we've got some people who are like, woo, I've got plenty of time in my day. I'm done with those 2 projects that you assigned to me. And we've got other people who feel completely buried. So I think that there's going to be some workload balancing. And so that will either create some new positions, or it may be the end of some positions. They have always said for the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years, that because of technology and the changes in technology, the jobs that are going to be available in 5 years, like half of them haven't even been created right now. Like we don't even know what technology is capable of doing for us and how we can marshal that for the future. But that's why right now innovation is key. That's why we've got to be thinking about these things, about what this could look like, so that when we have to weather this again, because there will be another something, right? There'll be a natural disaster. There'll be another pandemic. There'll be a recurrence of COVID-19 for people. So build in that resilience, so that when we go through something that looks like this again, we're better suited to handle it.
Thank you. All right, keep these questions coming. You talked a little bit earlier about how HR, the issues that HR is dealing with right now might be a little bit different than what they were dealing with when everyone was elbow to elbow in an office together. Can you speak a little bit more to what some of those changes might be? Maybe so that some of us can help get ahead of it, or just some tips and tricks that you have for HR as it relates to their new day-to-day?
Right. So, it's really on the front of employee relations, whatever that might mean to you and whatever that looks like within your own organization. So are those ADA compliance issues that we've had to deal with in the past? Will we have to deal with those if people are working from home, right? No. So we can change some things. But then does that mean our technology has to change a little bit so that we can help those that are with some sight impairment or hearing impairments and things like that, that maybe we had the infrastructure at work at the office, but we need to create that. But I think it begs opportunity to reevaluate how we address some of the things that happen with ADA. The big one for me, the obvious one, is maybe sexual harassment. Is that going to change when we're not in such close proximity one with another? Or other kinds of EEO discriminatory practices or things that have happened on site. Will that change a little bit and maybe lose some focus, so that we can talk more about innovation, we can talk more about diversity and inclusion? Because if we do move to this work from home kind of footprint, does it matter where their home is? Could their home be in another country? Could their home be in across the street from the office? Does it matter? I don't know. But your organization can investigate that. And then that's going to maybe create some new issues around diversity and inclusion, but also open up some opportunities for some really cool practices that the HR group has probably been dying to implement and hasn't had the bandwidth to be able to do so. So those are some of the things that I immediately think of when I think HR is going to change. You were on mute.
Next question. All right. Do you see this crisis permanently moving the needle for employers thinking of people as a critical resource?
Absolutely. I think if we've had one lesson, it is on the value of our employees, and perhaps restacking the deck a little bit for who is most critical to our operations when the rubber hits the road. But I definitely think that those that are going to make it through this pandemic in a positive way, with the most success, are those whose cultures have been strong in how they value their employee. Those are the ones that we're seeing make all the huge strides, right? That are doing all the cool things, that are getting the, all the publicity and social media, because their cultures have been strong and employees have been for a while at the central focus. But as we watch these companies begin to embrace that Davos manifesto and understanding that it's not all just about the shareholder, but if we do things the right way, the profits will come. I think that this is really shining a light on that.
Great. And actually part two to that same question. So or bonus question, it's not related. Do you think the improvement in the environment will shift the conversation about how communities and employers deal with their environmental footprint in the long run?
I hope. That's a hope on my part. I don't know, it's how much that's going to play into the idea. But if this has not been a time to elevate your corporate social responsibility programs and some of those ideals, then I don't know what would be the right time. But definitely, I think those that were already taking a more proactive stance towards sustainability are probably the companies and the organizations that are going to go further and faster through all this. But it is our hope that people will look at this much more seriously. And why would we want to go back to business as usual if the air we're breathing is better, if the water that we're drinking is cleaner, if all of this stuff is happening for the good? Who's that person who wants to go back, right?
Thank you. Okay, so some companies that have laid people off have received or will soon receive PPP funding, which, as we know, is put in place to maintain employment. So they're deciding if they should rehire their staff now, even though they may not have work for them to do. From an HR perspective, what advice do you have for companies in this situation?
Well, I think that you want to be mindful of setting precedent, right? Because if we have something else happen in the future, people are going to look back to this time and how did you handle this? So you could be creating some precedents for yourself that maybe they're great and it's awesome, but also you don't want to back yourself into a situation where you couldn't replicate this next time, or because you just want to be really super careful. And while I think there are wonderful things that you could do for your employee base, and certainly if you get money for it, then that you need to use that in the way that money was intended. But I think I would be very mindful and purposeful and seek some counsel on how I was going to put this into practice so that you're not creating issues, unintended consequences, shall we say, without good thought. But the way you handle your employees now is going to be very telling to how many employees you're going to have in the future.
Great. All right, so you mentioned that workers are feeling connected from C-suite and management. How do you think that executive leadership and managers can be more present and available for their workforce and find those connection points when those managers and leaders themselves are already overwhelmed with major shifts in the business model or the day-to-day operations?
It's true. It's the $64,000 question, to be sure. But there are so many tools out there available to us, and a lot of them that don't cost anything. Ways to open channels. I've heard success stories of managers just every morning opening like a Zoom channel where people could drop in just like they would have in the office when they would come by your door, and just pop their head in and ask a question. Leaving that channel open so an employee can come in, ask a question, and leave again. And you can respond just like you would in the office place. So that being available. I don't know that you have to be all up in their stuff all the time, right? But it's just the knowledge that I could get a hold of you if I needed you, kind of thing. So that's one easy best practice. I think having stand-up meetings at the beginning and the end of the day, one or the other or both, are great for building in that accountability. And as people are saying that they're going to do something and they prove themselves worthy of actually doing it, then I think you have the opportunity to trust a little bit more and to build that rhythm that works for you and your team. You got to be aware. You've got some extroverts on your team. They're going to need more. You got some introverts that are totally cool with, hey, they backed off a little bit. But And if you don't know what you have, then ask them, you know, how you hanging through all this? And if they start telling you about how lonely and isolated they feel, you know that that's somebody that needs a little bit more of your time and attention. And at the end of the day, as leaders, isn't our job number one to pave the way, to remove the obstacles for our employees to do the work? We're not the workers, we're the managers of the workers, right? So it's up to us as leaders to kind of remove the obstacles so that they can get that stuff that we hired them to do, that they can get that stuff done. And so this is your job number one. So all these other shinies that are distracting us from things, we have to realize that our principal focus needs to be sure that our employees can do what we've asked them to do.
Okay. Are there any particular like software tools or tricks?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and it really kind of depends on how large your organization is, and you know, if you're looking for the free stuff, the freemium stuff, or actually buying into some tools. There's Slack, there's Trello, there's Teams in Microsoft if you're a Microsoft organization. There are all sorts of, there's Skype for Business, Skype. There's all sorts of tools all along the spectrum that make it easy to collaborate. You know, one of my project teams, we use Teams, and that's been very successful for us. It's not like I'm, you know, ringing endorsement for Teams, but I have found that it's easy for us to communicate. It's easy for us to share files back and forth, you know, and that sort of thing. And everybody kind of know right hand what left hand's doing.
Awesome, thank you. So another question, the trend has been to use independent contractors to reduce overhead and avoid HR headaches. How do you see that playing out in the years ahead?
Yeah, so you know that whole idea of the gig economy that everybody's like written headlines for, this could propel us there a little faster. You know, people have been talking about this for years, and we toy around with it, but nobody's adequately been able to really investigate this from on a larger scale. I think that you know, when you talk to the pundits about what they see for 2030 and that sort of thing, pre-COVID, because I honestly think 2030 is tomorrow, you know, with all the changes that we've been going through. But that whole idea of an organization being super agile, in which we have like the leadership team and people who are good people, and then the subject matter experts, the project people, the worker people, are plug and play. And that the full-time employment would go more to those people who understand how to build the team, disassemble the team, build a new team for a new product, new process, and that sort of thing. And the plug and play people, the subject matter experts, the workers, would be much more independent contractors. We may see some of that as people have laid off their workforce. How are they going to bring them back? Are they going to say, you know what, we did okay without having some people in that, but we won't do okay all year. We do need those people in certain instances. So they may look at those things, and this may have a real impact on our 1099 pool, which begs a lot of other questions then. How are those people going to manage themselves? And do we have workers that are capable of being, you know, contractors and managing their schedule and managing their finances and managing their, you know, all that stuff, to be able to be successful as the contractee. Yeah.
So while we're on that topic, actually, because I know a handful of the folks that did sign up to participate in this program are, they might be sole proprietors. They might already be just an individual. They might not have employees. So do you have any advice or recommendations for folks who might be in that position, just in terms of, I don't know, keeping the motivation going during this time?
Right. I think that's why organizations, associations, and small groups and peer groups and those sorts of things are so critical, to stay connected, to hear what the other guy's doing, you know, so that you stay competitive, and stay aware. But as a sole proprietor, you have the luxury of being able to write the script however you want to write it, right, for the future. So take hold of those abilities, be in the driver's seat, think about, okay, if these things are going to happen, how can I capitalize on that? How can I leverage these things so that my sole proprietorship is going to be more valued, more relevant in the future. So this is the time to write the script for what you want the future to look like, and take ownership of that future. So, you know, attending things like this, just being mindful, reading, studying, listening, whatever, just to know, kind of which direction we're all headed.
Mhm. So shifting back to having a team,
Mhm.
if you're a manager, how do you set realistic expectations for employees as it relates to workload right now, while being sensitive to the fact that things are different? There's a lot of stress going on right now. This crisis has personally affected a lot of us. And so how do you balance that with still trying to hold people accountable?
Right. And I think so. I'm just going to keep leaning on that whole agile thing. Um, and having those stand-up meetings in the morning to talk about, here's what we've got to accomplish today. It's more of a team environment anyway, because if I am struggling and I'm honest and I say I'm struggling with something, there may be somebody else on the team that can help pick up the load. You don't want that to happen all the time. But I think the more transparent everybody is with each other, the easier it's going to be for that manager to understand how to rebalance, or how much grace to give in the moment. Because you could let people take advantage of you too, right? So you got to be careful about that. But I think if everybody is open and honest, and that may take some building, right? We may not be there yet with our teams, that whole trust bit. But I think the more that we can leverage that openness, the more the writing's going to be there for us. We're going to know how to take care of our workforce, because we're going to see it right in front of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If there was one way to improve productivity or teamwork or mental health while working from home, what would you change?
I would say accessibility, right? Just the knowledge that my leadership is accessible to me if I need them. I may never, uh, engage, but just knowing that they're there, and that they're willing and open to being available to me could mean everything. So if there's one little modicum of change, it's just let your people know that you're there, right? And they'll use that however much or however little that they actually need to, but just the knowledge that they can. That's sort of part of the whole we can't go anywhere thing. I don't need to go a lot of places, right? But the fact that you told me I can't, now all of a sudden I'm dying to go, here or there or whatever. So the opposite is true. If I know that I can depend on something, even if I don't need it, just the knowledge puts me at ease.
That's great. Question that I'm curious about. So we've actually done a little bit of hiring since
Mm-hmm.
this
Good.
started.
Yay.
And it's been really interesting and a challenge to try to
Mm-hmm.
bring new people onto the team when you can't physically be together. Do
Right.
you have any recommendations for, like, how do you build and maintain company culture remotely?
Mm-hmm. Right, right. So I think this has been a question that a lot, because like we had to move immediately to video interviewing. Well, that's weird. I don't get to see them. What do you mean? And I do think that if you are in a hiring, if COVID-19 has meant that you needed to hire and created opportunity for you, or if you just had hiring that needed to go on anyway, adding that video component to your interviewing process, I think is key. If you just relied on the phone, what we say is very little of how we really communicate, right? It's not just what our voice, but it's the inflection in our voice, but it's the facial expressions that we're making, and all that body language too, that goes into it. So if you haven't moved to using a platform that adds video to your interviewing, I would highly recommend that. And I think the way that you reach out to hire the folks in this time. If you're using a lot of social media, if you're using a lot of technology as your way to attract that talent, they're going to have an expectation that that continues on, right? You can't use all the sexy tools to bring me here, and then when I get here, you go, yeah, our Zoom only works on Thursday, or something like that. You've got to continue that. That's got to permeate your culture. But building into that culture when everybody is remote is tough, but it is necessary. However, I'm going to back up just a minute. The way that you attract people and the kind of people that you attract, you should have your processes in place where you're picking people who would already have fit into your culture if you were working at the office anyway, right? You have certain values. You have certain things that your organization believes in. You've got that wristband that says, what would we do in this case? And we all know because we all eat, live, and breathe the culture. So we shouldn't be hiring people who are outside of that in the first place. We should have all of our selection tools built to where we can identify those people right the first time. And then just doing those things that we did in person to keep our culture alive, looking for those innovative and creative ways to be able to extend that. My team, my personal individual team, wasn't a team that did a lot of stuff. We just didn't need it. You know, we're all people who've been working forever, and we get what our jobs are, and we're not a team that needs to be patted on the head or do too much, but we are fun as a group. And so we found that we can still do those things with our Hattie hours and, our next happy hour type thing is going to be 80s attire and stuff like that. That's us. That's our kind of people. So doing that sort of thing that just kind of injects a little bit of that culture, a little bit of if you're a fun culture, you might not be a fun culture. You might be all stuffy and that's your culture. And that's okay. Just institute those things that kind of bring the culture along outside of the bricks and mortar, because culture isn't stuck inside an office, right? That's not where it is. It resides in the individuals that work for you and that you hire. So you got to get it right before you bring them in. But then once they're here, you just need to engender that, and keep it going. Great. That was a long answer to a short.
No, that was great. Thank you so much. Cool. So Jill, is there anything else that you want to kind of close with?
Well, I just think, these are exciting times. And if we look at it through that lens, that not the, oh, woe is me, the sky's falling, but look at it from a standpoint of, oh my gosh, we're watching the history of the workforce change right in front of us. It can be really inspiring. It can be really exciting, and can get your juices flowing for how you can innovate so you can stay relevant and be relevant in the future. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us, Jill. This was really, really great. Guys, I don't want the next part to come because guess what? It's all over. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now just for a couple wrap-up slides. So thank you again. Okay, I think you can all see that now. So just a reminder, if you have not done this yet, please go ahead and sign up for one of our one-on-one consultations with our team. We really want to get a chance to meet you and talk with you and learn more about what you're going through and get any specific questions answered that you might have. Again, that's a wrap. So thanks so much for joining us over these last 2 weeks. We want to continue to be a resource for you, so please don't forget about us. All of the webinars that we went through over the last 2 weeks are on our Vimeo page, just vimeo.com/generator. There are also recorded webinars from the 13 other markets that we're doing these emergency response programs in. All of the topics that we did in those different markets have shifted slightly. Some of them have different speakers. So if you think that there are other resources that can be valuable to you in there, please go ahead and check them out. And then my email is right there. My cell phone number is in my email signature. I've sent you probably 24 emails throughout all of this. So I hope you'll make use of that. I will be following up with everyone probably tomorrow with a survey. This is just to get some feedback about your experience in the program, how valuable you found the content, and give us some more feedback to improve the future ones that we'll be holding. So thank you in advance for filling that out. And then as always, we'll be posting this webinar and sending a follow-up email with some resources. So that's a wrap. Thank you so much. I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Have a great weekend. Continue to make use of the resources that we've made available to you during this program. And do not be a stranger. Please reach out if we can do absolutely anything for you, your business, your community. So thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.